Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. J.K. Rowling. This book is for Jessica, who loves stories, for Anne, who loved them too, and for Dee, who heard this one first. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dudley of Number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dudley was the director of a firm called Groanings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large moustache. Mrs. Dudley was thin and blonde, and has nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as he spent so much of the time crying over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dudleys has a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dudleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dudley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dudley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband was as un-Dudleyish as it was possible to be. The Dudsleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dudleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never ever seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dudley woke up on the Dow, Gray Tuesday our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dudley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dudley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large, tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dudley picked up his briefcase, perked Mrs. Dudley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. "Little tyke," chortled Mr. Dudley as he left the house, got into his car, and backed out of Number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar: a cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dudley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dudley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dudley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in its mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dudley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day.